Welcome to the Monsters Among Us podcast. This is Season 2, Episode 25, The Frederick Valentich Disappearance. Welcome also to the Deep Dive, where we take complex information, your sources, and unearth the most compelling insights. Our mission today is to, cut through the noise surrounding a really fascinating historical mystery, helping you become truly well-informed. Today we're taking a deep dive into the perplexing disappearance of Frederick Valentich. This is an event that's baffled investigators, sparked countless theories since way back in 1978. We've got a rich stack of sources to explore here, everything from official reports to, ufology claims, trying to understand what happened to this young pilot.
Absolutely. And what's so fascinating, I think, is how this one specific, really unnerving radio transmission became the absolute cornerstone of this enduring mystery. We're going to unpack the details of that fateful flight and look at the various explanations that have trying to make sense of it all. For anyone out there who loves a good puzzle, this deep dive, it offers plenty of aha moments and maybe even a few more questions than answers by the end.
Okay, let's dive in then. Start at the beginning. Who exactly was Frederick Valentich, the pilot at the center of this?
Right. Frederick Valentich was a young Australian pilot, just 20 years old at the time. He had logged about 150 hours of flying time. He also held a Class 4 instrument rating. Now, that allowed him to fly at night, but importantly, only in visual conditions, so he had to be able to see where he was going, not rely solely on instruments.
Okay, 150 hours.
Okay.
So some experience, but maybe not a veteran pilot.
Not really, no. And he was incredibly determined, apparently, to make a career in aviation, but he had actually been rejected twice by the Royal Australian Air Force, the RAAF.
Oh, really? Why was that?
They cited inadequate education, and adding to that, his academic record in his commercial pilot studies wasn't great either. He apparently failed multiple subjects, some more than once.
So some passion there, but maybe facing some challenges in the formal training side of things. What about his actual track record as a pilot, beyond just the hours, any incidents?
He certainly did have a history. There were a few things. He'd strayed into a controlled zone in Sydney once, got a warning for that. But maybe more concerning, there were records of him twice deliberately flying into cloud.
Deliberately?
Yes, deliberately, which led to potential prosecution. These weren't just, minor mistakes. They were conscious decisions that, they really raised questions about his judgment, maybe his adherence to safety protocols.
That is a bit concerning for a pilot. Okay, so that's his flying background. But before we get to the flight itself, what about his mindset, his personal beliefs? Anything relevant there?
This is actually, I think, a really crucial piece of the puzzle. According to his father, Guido, Frederick was an ardent believer in UFOs.
A believer, like really into it.
Yeah, apparently quite strongly. And he'd even expressed worries about being attacked by them. And maybe even more strikingly, his girlfriend at the time, Rhonda Rushton, she reported something quite specific.
What was that?
She said that just 6 days, only 6 days before he disappeared, Frederick had actually discussed with her the possibility of a UFO taking him away.
Wow. Okay, that definitely adds a layer. So he's thinking about this, maybe even worried about it, right before this flight.
Exactly. That context, his belief system, it's really significant when we consider how he might have interpreted what happened next.
Right. So with all that in mind, the experience level, the past incidents, the UFO beliefs, let's turn to the flight itself. He was heading to King Island.
Yes, his stated destination was King Island. It was meant to be a 125 nautical mile training flight. But his actual motivation for the trip, it remains a bit puzzling.
How so?
He told flight officials he was going to pick up friends, but then he told other people he was going to pick up crayfish.
Friends or crayfish, those are pretty different.
They are, and later investigations actually found both of those reasons to be untrue. So it adds this layer of ambiguity even before he takes off. Plus, he failed to inform King Island Airport that he intended to land there. That's against standard procedure.
So an undeclared purpose, maybe even a bit of mystery surrounding why he was even making the flight. Okay, the stage is definitely set. He takes off in his Cessna 182L. What happens next?
Okay, so it's Saturday evening, October 21st, 1978. At 7:06 p.m., Valentich radios Melbourne flight service. He reports an unidentified aircraft following him. He says it's at his altitude, 4,500 feet. He was immediately told, though, that there was no known traffic at that level near him.
Okay, so right away there's a discrepancy. He sees something, but air traffic control sees nothing. This is where it gets really strange, right?
Yeah.
What did he actually describe seeing?
This is the core, absolutely. He described a large, unknown aircraft. He said it appeared to be lit by 4 bright landing lights. He couldn't confirm its type, couldn't identify it, but he said it passed about 1,000 feet directly over him, moving at high speed.
1,000 feet overhead. That's incredibly close for an unknown aircraft. Must have been unsettling.
Extremely. He then reported it was approaching him from the east. And he even speculated that the other pilot might be deliberately toying with him, messing with him.
Okay, so he thinks it might be another plane initially, just acting strangely.
Possibly at first, but then his description gets more specific and more unusual. He elaborated, saying the aircraft was now orbiting directly above him. And this is key. He described it as having a shiny metal surface and a green light on it.
Orbiting. Shiny metal.
Yeah.
Green light. That doesn't sound like a standard aircraft, does it?
Not at all. This detailed description, metallic glowing craft that was hovering and circling, as he put it, that's what really captured everyone's attention later. And he explicitly stated, this is a direct quote from the transcript essentially, that the craft wasn't like any aircraft he had ever seen before.
Wow. Okay, so he's clearly describing something outside his experience, something unidentifiable. And then what happened? Did he say anything else?
Well, after reporting these details, he also mentioned having some engine problems, like rough idling. Melbourne Flight Service asked him again to identify the aircraft to try and get a type, and that's when his final, really stark radio transmission came through.
What was it?
He just said, "It's not an aircraft."
It's not an aircraft.
Yeah.
Chilling.
Absolutely. And immediately after that, all they heard was about 17 seconds of unidentified noise before all contact was lost. It was described later in the report as like metallic scraping sounds.
Metallic scraping.
Yeah.
And then silence. Just gone.
Gone. It's just this dramatic, completely inexplicable end to the communication, leaves you with that baffling final message and that strange sound.
That silence must have been incredibly alarming for everyone listening in air traffic control. What did they do immediately after losing contact?
Well, a comprehensive search and rescue operation was launched almost immediately, sea and air. It was a big effort. Ocean-going ships were involved, a Royal Australian Air Force Lockheed P-3 Orion aircraft, plus 8 civilian aircraft. They covered over 1,000 square miles of ocean.
And did they find anything, any sign of him or the plane?
Nothing. The search lasted 4 days until October 25th, but they found absolutely no trace. It was called off without any result. It was like he and his Cessna had just vanished.
Vanished.
Yeah.
So what was the official conclusion then? What did the investigation say?
The Australian Department of Transport conducted the official investigation, but ultimately they were unable to determine the cause of the disappearance. Their final report concluded only that the incident was presumed fatal for Valentich, no cause determined.
Presumed fatal, but no explanation. That's unsatisfying. Did anything ever turn up later?
Interestingly, yes, but much later. 5 years after the disappearance, in 1983, an engine cowl flap washed ashore on Flinders Island. It was identified as potentially being from Valentich's Cessna 182 model, so it hinted that the plane likely did crash into the sea.
Okay, so maybe evidence of a crash, but still doesn't explain why it crashed, or the bizarre radio transmission.
Exactly. It doesn't explain the encounter he described at all, which of course leads us into the theories. With no concrete answers, speculation just ran wild.
Right, let's unpack some of those. What were the more, let's say, conventional explanations put forward, the ones that don't involve, little green men?
Well, some officials within the Transport Department speculated about disorientation. It's a known hazard for pilots, especially at night over water. They suggested he might have inadvertently put the plane into an unusual attitude, maybe even flying upside down without realizing it.
Upside down. How would that explain the lights he saw?
The theory goes he might have been seeing his own aircraft lights reflected off the water surface below him. Or perhaps he saw lights from a nearby island, but because he was disoriented, he perceived them as being above him or moving strangely.
Spatial disorientation. That's certainly a plausible, if tragic, explanation for some pilot incidents. What about other non-UFO ideas?
Another one that got floated was the idea of a staged disappearance.
Stage. Like he faked the whole thing. Why would people think that?
There were a few points raised. One, his Cessna 182 had enough fuel for about 800 kilometers. That's way more than he needed for the short hop to King Island. So theoretically, he could have flown much further away.
Okay, opportunity.
2, despite the conditions being apparently ideal for radar tracking, his aircraft was never actually plotted on radar near Cape Otway, where he reported the encounter. That raised doubts about whether he was even there when he made those radio calls.
No radar contact. That's strange, too.
It is. And third, there were reports received by Melbourne police around the same time of a light aircraft making a mysterious landing not far from Cape Otway. Unconfirmed, but added to the speculation.
So fuel range, no radar, mysterious landing report. It paints a picture, I guess. What about suicide? Was that considered?
It was considered, yes, but interviews conducted with his doctors and colleagues pretty much ruled that out. They felt it was highly unlikely based on his known state of mind.
Okay. So disorientation, staged disappearance. What else? I heard something about a movie connection.
Ah, yes, Brian Dunning's hypothesis. He's a writer known for skepticism. He pointed out something interesting. Valentich's radio conversation, particularly the description of the object and the interaction, bore a striking resemblance to a key scene in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
The Spielberg movie. That had just come out, hadn't it?
Less than a year before, and it was huge. Dunning speculated that Valentich, perhaps influenced by his known UFO beliefs and the popularity of the film, might have been, well, essentially imitating that scene. Maybe for fun, maybe to spook the controllers.
So like a hoax that went wrong.
Potentially. Dunning suggests maybe he was flying erratically, perhaps in circles, trying to give the radar guys something to see as part of the act, and in doing so, he accidentally became disoriented and crashed. It's a sort of pop culture-induced accident theory.
That's a wild theory, but it does try to connect his beliefs and the timing. What about more sort of scientific or psychological explanations for what he thought he saw?
Right. There's another compelling one from astronomer and retired USAF pilot James McGaha, working with author Joe Nickell. They reviewed the transcripts, too. They proposed that Valentich, as a relatively inexperienced pilot, might have been fooled by something called a tilted horizon illusion, especially flying over the dark water at night.
Tilted horizon illusion.
Yeah.
What's that?
It's where you lose your true sense of horizontal orientation. In trying to correct what he thought was an incorrect bank, he might have inadvertently entered a graveyard spiral.
A graveyard spiral. Sounds ominous.
It is. It's a steep, tightening, descending turn that pilots can get locked into if they become disoriented. They think they're flying level, but they're actually spiraling down. McGaha and Nickell suggested the G-forces in such a spiral could restrict fuel flow, which might explain the rough idling Valentich reported with his engine.
Okay, that connects the engine issue. What about the lights he saw? The orbiting object?
Their explanation for that was astronomical. They suggested the bright, seemingly stationary lights he described orbiting above him were most likely the planets Venus, Mars, and Mercury, along with the bright star Antares. These would have been visible in that part of the sky, and under certain conditions of flight attitude and disorientation, they could appear to move or hover relative to the aircraft.
So a combination of pilot disorientation and misidentified celestial bodies? That's a very grounded explanation.
It is. It relies purely on known physics, physiology, and astronomy. No unknown craft needed.
But of course, given Valentich's own stated beliefs and that final chilling transmission, it's not an aircraft. The UFO explanation persists, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. For many people, especially in the ufology community, this is the prime explanation. They take Valentich at his word. The claim is generally that a UFO either destroyed his aircraft or outright abducted him.
What evidence do they point to beyond Valentich's own words?
They often highlight other reports from around that time and area. Some people claim they saw an erratically moving green light in the sky that night. They connect this to the green light Valentich mentioned on the craft he described. Some reports also suggested his plane was seen in a steep dive just before contact was lost.
A green light, matching his description. Is there any counter to those reports?
Well, yes. It's important to note that the Mount Stromlo Observatory, a professional astronomical observatory, confirmed there was a significant meteorite stream occurring that night. They estimated sightings of 10 to 15 meteors per hour. Meteors often appear as bright, sometimes greenish, streaks of light moving quickly across the sky, so that could potentially explain some, if not all, of those other ground-based sightings.
Okay, so maybe meteors, maybe something else. It's still ambiguous. What about pictures? Was there ever any photographic evidence? The so-called smoking gun?
There was a claim, yes. A group called Ground Saucer Watch, based in Arizona, publicized some photos taken by a local plumber named Roy Manifold. He apparently took these photos on the very day Valentich disappeared, near the Cape Otway lighthouse. The photos seemed to show a fast-moving object apparently exiting the water.
Exiting the water. That sounds dramatic. What did Ground Saucer Watch say it was?
They argued it was a bona fide unknown flying object, describing it as being of moderate dimensions and apparently surrounded by a cloud-like vapor exhaust residue. They presented it as strong evidence.
But I sense a but coming.
Well, yes. Others examined the photos, including folks like Snopes editor Jordan Lyles. The counter-argument was much more mundane. They suggested the object in the photo was most likely just an insect, like an out-of-focus fly or perhaps a bird passing very close to the camera lens when the picture was taken.
A fly or a bird versus a UFO exiting the ocean. That's quite a difference in interpretation.
It really highlights the challenge, doesn't it? And interpreting ambiguous evidence, especially photographs, is incredibly difficult. Our expectations can heavily influence what we think we see.
Absolutely. So we've journeyed through the knowns, the many unknowns of Frederick Valentich's disappearance. We've heard his own description, that metallic, glowing craft orbiting unlike any aircraft he knew. And we've looked at all these theories, trying to piece it together. What really stands out to you now, reflecting on this whole deep dive?
You know, what's truly fascinating, I think, is how all these different explanations can seem plausible, at least to some degree. Each one has bits of evidence, bits of logic supporting it, but none of them definitively closes the case. Not the disorientation, not the staged disappearance, not the UFO theory, they all coexist. And it just raises that fundamental question, how should we approach these deeply ambiguous events, especially when the final moments involve something described as unidentifiable based on very subjective perception under stress?
Yeah, it really leaves us with so much to consider, doesn't it? This case is such a stark reminder of how quickly that solid ground of fact can just give way to speculation when information is limited and interpretations can run in so many directions. It's a real lesson, I think, in critical thinking, but also in accepting the limits of what we can actually know for sure. Sometimes the neat conclusion just isn't there.
Indeed. And for you, the listener, we hope this deep dive has given you not just the facts as we know them, but maybe a framework for thinking about complex, unsolved mysteries like this one. What's maybe most profound about the Valentich case isn't just the mystery itself, but how it kind of exposes our very human need for answers, for closure, even when the facts are so frustratingly incomplete. It forces you to decide what you believe or perhaps what questions you'll keep asking.
That is the end of this episode. Until next time, keep to the shadows. Some legends are best left undiscovered.